Good morning. Welcome. I am delighted to see you all here. This promises to be a really exciting morning for us. We are so excited for DFW to be launching its inaugural advocacy panel with its inaugural advocacy committee at the helm. I'm going to take just a moment to introduce them, or those who are here. I'm Diane Smock. I had the honor of being the co-chair when it was started. I'm no longer serving on the committee, but I'm a huge supporter and delighted with the work they've done. So those of you, let's start with our chair, Betsy Dunklin. I know Betsy's in the room. This is Betsy, our chair. And Betsy, do you have other committee members here with you? They have done a magnificent job, and I just want to mention a couple things just real quickly, and you can refer to them later, both on the website and here. We're going to leave a lot of materials here on the stage for you. This terrific advocacy guide is available on the website. You all have one in your packets from the conference. I encourage you to review this and share it with your chapters. It's full of really vital information, very easy to read, and explains a lot about foreign aid and the foreign aid budget and how it's put together, and the importance of advocating for programs that empower women and girls in that budget. There's also a sample postcard. Again, we have lots of these at the bottom. Take this, and we'll refer to some of these during the program, but I wanted you to be aware of that. In addition, there's a sample letter to the editor and other materials, again, both here on the stage and on the website, the DFW website, dfw.org/advocacy. Very easy to find. Excuse me, diningforwomen.org. Beth Ellen is here. Good, thank goodness, to correct me with that. Now I have the pleasure of introducing a sterling panel, lots of expertise, and I know they'll address many of the things you're wondering about, but we of course want to hear your questions at the end. I'm going to start at the other end of the stage with our DFW member, Betsy Teutsch. She is an author, a chapter leader, and a blogger. She is passionate about mobilizing resources for the world's poorest women, and she's the author of a terrific book, which I had the pleasure of reading last night. Solidarity among DFW members here. The name of the book is 100 Under $100, Tools for Empowering Global Women. Promoting affordable paths out of rural poverty. So of great interest to all of us here. She's a founding board member of the award-winning Shining Hope for Communities and the Cabarrus School for Girls. And she has launched 3 Dining for Women chapters in Northwest Philadelphia. Next, we have Carrie Campbell, who is the National Outreach Director for the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. And most recently served as Chief of Staff to the South Carolina House of Representatives Deputy Minority Leader James Smith. She's worked on, yeah, some James Smith fans here. She has worked on numerous political campaigns at the local, state, and presidential level, overseeing field fundraising and policy development. I've worked with Carrie in the past, and I can attest to her hard work, enthusiasm, and depth of knowledge. Then we have Grace Choi. We welcome her to the stage. She currently serves as the Associate Director for Global Gender Policy and Advocacy for Save the Children USA. She has served in our U.S. State Department, has worked on Capitol Hill, and has also served on the U.S. Committee for Human Rights in North Korea. So Grace, again, has a vast array of experience in this area of advocacy and foreign aid. To my immediate right is Jonathan Pearson, who's the Advocacy Director for the National Peace Corps Association, and is himself a Peace Corps volunteer alumna. alumni, excuse me. He works with NCPA members and other supporters to advance policies to expand, improve, and embolden the Peace Corps and promote opportunities for international service. And he engages with other advocates on other key global issues that impact the lives of people and communities in countries where the Peace Corps serves. I do need to note that he has received the highest and only distinction from the National Peace Corps Association, and that's the Peace Corps Champion of 2017. So just a quick bit about my role. I'm a former elected official, and so that is why I'm passionate about advocacy from the citizens, because I learned from my role in public life that the only way to really ensure democracy working is through an active and engaged citizenry. I think it's incumbent upon each of us to raise our voice. We all have different ways of doing that. We have different comfort levels. We have different issues we're passionate about. But it is up to us to make sure that democracy works every day. So I think on the issues that we're going to be discussing today, it may seem a little daunting at first, but just remember your elected officials are people just like you, and in many ways they depend on you to educate and inform them about the issues. They want to hear from you about what's important to you, why you care, and I think the greatest tool you have is that you are there because you care. You are not a paid lobbyist. You're not talking to them because someone else wants you to. You are there because you are called to help women and girls around the world, and you know it's important that our policies reflect that care. So I want to kick it off now with our stellar DFW member, Betsy. If you'll just tell us a little bit about what drew you to Grassroots advocacy and some of the things that you've experienced.
Well, it's great to be here. I want to say that it's frustrating because I feel like I could sit down with anybody here and have a great conversation with so many points of connection. So thanks. I want you to raise your hand if you are a female who finds it a little uncomfortable to self-advocate sometimes. Okay. That's kind of a baseline. We're socialized to not raise our voices, and what advocacy is, we're not talking here about self-advocacy. We're talking about advocating on behalf of women without access to what we all have. If you are an American educated woman, you have a lot of wind in your sails, and it's a question of getting practice speaking up and using your voice. And I want to just tell you the good news. Previous careers of mine include being a teacher and an artist, so I have flashcards. It's not fundraising. You're not asking people to donate money. You're asking people you're making it very easy for them to speak up for other women. You're giving them a message. You're giving them a clear platform to work from, and people are very happy to follow your lead if you take it. My own story is that I was an artist, as I said, so I had a lot of opportunities for self-expression, but I did not use them for advocacy until I was around 50. I think this is a common story for a lot of women, although you haven't all gotten to 50 yet, but you will, hopefully. And I became much more interested in global issues, environmental issues, and I started to write a column for my local food co-op newspaper, and that sounds really pedoinky, but it had about 10,000 households, and it was a very engaged, targeted readership, people that really cared about issues beyond just everyday issues. So that was how I first found my voice. That gave me what I'm going to call a platform. There are a lot of different ways that people use the term platform, but it's kind of a soapbox, I would say, a way to get your voice out there a little bit larger. And just saying that we have this huge platform that has been provided for Dining for Women, by Dining for Women, and use it to target it and tailor it to your local connections. So from the experience of writing that column, I had a little bit of a platform. And then I was a founding board member of Shining Hope for Communities, which was a Dining for Women grantee about 7 or 8 years ago, and then a sustaining grant. Representing Dining for Women, I went to speak at, representing Shining Hope for Communities, I went to speak at the Abington chapter out in the suburbs, and I had never heard of Dining for Women. And I was so wowed by the level of engagement of these women. They just knew so much, and I went on and on. I broke every rule about being a speaker. I probably spoke for like 90 minutes because everybody kept asking really penetrating, deep questions, like, tell me about the toilets there. Because, you know, they knew about sanitation and issues. So I asked them, how did your chapter form? And they said, well, a lot of us knew each other, you know, decades before when their children were students together at a local parish school. And all those soccer tournaments and all those first communions, people really had gotten to know each other, and those relationships had endured, so that when they formed a chapter, they had kind of a foundation. And I want to bring this concept up. This is social capital. Social capital is what is created by face-to-face, not social media, not your Facebook friends. These are the real people that you see every day. When I started recruiting, Briege was in my Pilates group. And I knew Bonnie from environmental work we'd done together. If you're an active member of a synagogue, a church, a mosque, you know, all these different ways that you know people create social capital. And when you're becoming an advocate, what you need to do is tap in to your social capital network. So I used that platform of the column that I wrote, and I pitched an idea for a local Dining for Women chapter. And lo and behold, I don't know, it was amazing. I've never tried anything that was so effective. We now have 4 chapters, all very high functioning. And I think Dining for Women is the all-time best social capital builder. I mean, I can honestly say that at this stage in my life, I really have new friends, and it's not that common, I think, for people. When you live in the same place, it's actually not that easy to make new friends, and these are people with whom I share deep connections. So then I went ahead and wrote that book, which we talked about, and that's one thing. It's an advocacy book encouraging all the different ways that we can help women with existing solutions. And it's very hard when you're doing advocacy to measure your impact. That's one thing that's really frustrating. You don't know if you have an impact. And so same for that book. I have no idea because people don't write the author and say, I followed one of your suggestions. But one of the women that reviewed my book got in touch with me, and she said, because of you turned me on to Solar Sisters, which I think is also a past grantee, and I'm going to fundraise for them and climb Mount Kilimanjaro. So advocacy sometimes gets other people to do things that you would be incapable of doing yourself. So you have to have a certain amount of faith and trust that this is going to make a difference. Because if you don't do anything, you know that you will have 0 impact. So anything you can do is from a baseline of 0. So a woman in our Dining for Women chapters wrote about the book and me, and she said, Betsy, it was my favorite all-time description. She said, Betsy is a megaphone for global women. So if one person can be a megaphone, think what 4,000 members on a unified voice around the country in 50 states, and who knows how many congressional districts could really be. So this is about Dining for Women becoming a megaphone. And I want to give one example of the way that some of this has worked locally in Philadelphia. A friend of mine, not a Dining for Women member, invited a bunch of her friends to get together to write postcards once a week for an hour, Fridays at 2 p.m. And because it's very easy to despair with this backlash against human rights and women's rights in the United States and globally. And she just felt like if we just all sit and stew and get depressed, it's going to be awful. So we get together for 1 hour. We have a name. We are called the Persistent Postcarders. And we don't have a particular agenda, but if I bring one and say, please, let's write about women's, the International Violence Against Women Treaty, or all the things laid out in the Dining for Women platform, people will be very happy to do that, along with all the other postcards. And one of the things that I want to suggest is if you're doing a postcard campaign, pre-stamp, you can actually still get postcard stamps. And like if you said to somebody, I'll pay you 35 cents to write a postcard, people would look at you like you were insane. But if you give people a pre-stamped postcard, it's going to just sit there and make them feel like they must do that. So the potential that you have for building a network of advocates is immense. You just have to be creative. And my closing urging is make it fun. People love to get together. We have a dearth of opportunities to connect. And if you can figure out, add a postcard to your book club, add it to your Dining for Women chapter. Make it really, really, really easy. Get those postcards ready, stamp them, and you will be an advocate. Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy, and I think that she just enforces the idea that this can be fun and easy. You don't have to be a professional to know what you're doing. You just get together with your friends, you talk about what you care about and why you care about, and just express that in a way that's comfortable to you. Email, postcard. The other thing I want to mention, Betsy and I have talked about this, the importance of saying thank you. If you have a postcard party and there may not be a hot topic of the day, although that's unusual these days, but if there's not a topic that you're concerned about particularly to advocate for, or if the session has just ended, you can write your representatives and thank them for whatever efforts they did make, or even for just listening to you. And that's important too. They need to know that you're there and you appreciate the work that they do. Carrie, talk to us now. We're gonna move into kind of the federal realm at this point, and someone who's working directly with our national representatives. Talk to us a little bit about why U.S. Foreign aid is important to and supported by both Republicans and Democrats, and a little bit about your work.
Sure, great. First, let me say, Beth Ellen and members of the DFW committee, thank you for the invitation to be up here. It's an honor to be sitting with some of my coalition partners and meeting Betsy. And I would also like to apologize. I don't have a book, nor do I use pedonky in my vocabulary, nor do I have flashcards. So next time I'll become better prepared. So let me just tell you a little bit about my organization. DFW is a great partnership of ours. Beth Ellen, I met you. I went back through my emails. We met and our first conversation was in 2015. I think you all became a member of U.S. Global Leadership Coalition in late 2016. Due diligence. Know that your leadership has due diligence in any work that's getting done. And has been a great partner of USGLC, along with our other 500 coalition members, which Save the Children and the Peace Corps Foundation are both a part of. So the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition advocates for the overall funding for the international affairs budget, all of our foreign assistance funding. So we're not doing specific advocacy work for women and girls, although we started a campaign this year that brought community or organizations that are in this space into a campaign called Leading Globally Matters Locally. And the idea here is that if you cut any funding out of the international affairs budget, it's going to affect every issue, whether that be the Peace Corps, whether that be women and girls, or whether that be economic development agencies or State Department. So this year, I'm just going to give a quick synopsis, and Jonathan can probably, and Grace can probably speak to this better. But this year, the federal budget really, the international affairs budget really came under attack. The administration put out its proposed budget at the beginning of the year that called for, depending on who you talk to, a 30 to 36% cut. And this is just unacceptable. Meanwhile, raising the other budgets by $526 million. So that's when we all sort of came together as a coalition and really started to share our voices on Capitol Hill together. USGLC also does work around the country, not just in Washington, but we do, and I oversee the work we do around the nation. And one of the things we were hearing from members of Congress, both on the Democratic and Republican side, was, I hear this in Washington from organizations like Save the Children, I hear this from the Peace Corps, I hear this inside the Beltway, but when I go home and talk to my constituents, I never hear it. It's never been talked about. No one has ever come to my office and said, the international affairs budget matters. We changed that. So we pull people together from around the country like yourselves. This is why you all are so invaluable to our work and the work that you all are doing, is that we speak with one voice. So it's not just the 8,000 members that are Dining for Women, it's the other 2,500 members plus that we have, plus the members of Save the Children and all the other coalition members that are all singing that same song that makes it impactful. Going back to the question is that when the budget came under attack, you saw Democrats and Republicans on both sides of the aisle amazingly come together on one issue, which we haven't seen, God knows we haven't seen nonpartisanship in such a long time, but they did on this issue. You saw Senator McConnell, as well as Paul Ryan, as well as Lindsey Graham, who is the biggest champion on these issues, say, no, this budget's dead on arrival. We are not doing this. And the reason why it matters to both Democrats and Republicans is that they all know the impact of this budget. They all know that this budget is a matter of our local economic development, that there's a direct return on investment of job creation, of exporting American businesses' goods and services, as well as part of our national security strategy. It keeps us all safe. And as Americans, it's the right thing to do. I mean, we are the wealthiest country, and we should do this. So Democrats and Republicans both share that ideology. I mean, we may think getting there or take different paths to get there, but we all share that commonality. So we work with Democrats and Republicans across the country in Capitol Hill to say that voice and push back to those members who don't understand the impact of this budget. And really, so often, it's about education. It really is about education. And one of the things that Diane had mentioned is, don't be afraid that you don't know the issues, because I promise you members of Congress often don't know the issues. I can't tell you how many meetings I have been in, and I've said, did you know that X, Y, and Z is funded out of this budget? Why, no, I didn't know that. Well, but that's our job. You know, we can't expect members of Congress to know everything. So our job is to share with them what we know and let them make the informed decision. But you as constituents, you as the voter, have the power because they want to get reelected. And quite frankly, they also want your checks when it comes election time. So know that you have the power to make all the difference in the world. And you're not going in there alone. You're going in there with our coalition members. You're going in there with these members as well.
Thanks, Carrie, and I want to add just a bit of my own personal experience. You know, we can't all get to D.C. all the time to go up on the Hill and talk to people, but what almost every state, at least, of course, we live in a small state, but even in South Carolina, all of our members, our senators have offices in all the major cities, and certainly the congressional members have at least one, if not more, local offices. And I've learned that developing a relationship with local staff has gone a long way. Again, it's that just continual, not every week necessarily, but you know, I stay in communication with local, especially Senator Graham's staff. And so if something comes up last minute, they may even call me. And I'm hardly an expert, but what I do know is I know who to call to put them into, and I can get the information to them that they're looking for. So the local offices can be quite helpful, especially for those who can't get to DC or aren't comfortable going up to Capitol Hill to talk to their members. Now let's focus a little bit more squarely on our women and girls around the world. And Grace, will you tell us a little bit about your work and some of the specific focuses you have on our common concerns?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me here. It's an honor. I actually had not heard of Dining for Women until I was reached out to speak today. So I'm really inspired and grateful that all of you have come together for the last 2 days in order to ensure that our governments function well and that democracy continues to exist, and for you all, that you all care about the empowerment of women and girls around the world. And I just also want to say, to your point, Carrie, on how the international affairs budget was a very bipartisan opportunity, also because the fact that less than 1% of our U.S. government budget goes to international affairs work. And I think there's like a misconception and misperception that maybe 30 to 35% of our government's budget goes to helping people overseas. It's
Can
less than 1%.
I don't want to interrupt, but I want to underline that. Less than 1%. That's the key takeaway. Thanks.
Right. And so to that point, that less than 1% can have just immeasurable value, return on investment and value that comes from it, because when you invest in women and girls on the ground through diplomacy, through development, through our foreign aid, you're ensuring that not only that countries are more prosperous, there's economic growth, but there's stability, and that achieves our own objectives of wanting peace and security, prosperity. These are things that we want here at home, but you can't ensure that when you don't, as a global leader, also invest overseas. So just bringing that home, and also when you talk to other folks, your representatives in your own communities, as well as when you're here in DC, reminding them of that ripple effect from less than 1% of our government's budget towards that. When it comes to advocating on, well, Save the Children has been around for about 100 years, and we're in 120 countries. We work in every single humanitarian disaster situation in basically any development context. We also have programs here in the US. We were at the forefront of the hurricane relief efforts in the last year, providing services to mothers and children, making sure they continue to have access to vaccines, to health services, to books, to shelter. And so that's some of the work that we do here in the US. But in terms of our advocacy that we do and work around the world, because we are an implementing organization, which basically means that we get a lot of money actually from the US government, from USAID, which is the development agency here, in order to ensure that there's programming on the ground that is implemented in order to make a difference for women and girls on the ground. And one of the programs that I wanted to share with you all is, it's called the Rev Program. I need to read it because it's kind of, we use a lot of acronyms in DC, and so I'm like, what does Rev mean? Even USAID, I just kind of said it out loud, but it's like the US, the Agency for International Development, thank you. I'm like, what is, I just say acronyms all day. It doesn't even make sense. Rev Program is Resources Towards Elimination of Child Vulnerability. This is a 5-year program that's funded by the US government in Cote d'Ivoire, and Save the Children, along with a couple of other implementing nonprofits, JPEGO included. What we do is we go into the communities in Cote d'Ivoire, and we educate the families, the community leaders, and various folks in the community through mentorship and through Village Savings and Loan Association program to talk about what is gender-based violence, what are the consequences of a girl being violated, what is the consequences of a girl not getting educated. And we also, through that program, empower adults and girls with life skills courses, and we teach them what gender norms are, what gender-based violence means, what child marriage is. And what's happened from this is actually, it's still an ongoing program that's being funded by our government. There's a girl, Nicola, who's 17 years old, and through the Life Skills Mentoring Program, what she's found is she was on her way to get married off as a 17-year-old to an older man in her village. And when she learned, oh, I have an opportunity to educate myself, and after I get educated, I can have a job opportunity and be given more than what people expect of me as a girl, she refused to continue being in the process of being forced to be married off by her parents. But it wasn't until her uncle, who was a male gender champion, or he for she kind of champion guy, and her mentor's help from the Life Skills program, that her parents respected her decision. So what you're seeing is that when you invest less than 1% of our US government budget towards ensuring that a girl and her community has a sense of what her future could look like, it can have a ripple effect. It takes some time, but what she's realizing is, I can make a difference, I have a voice, I can be my own advocate, But if she's her own advocate without people around her also supporting her, it's not as effective. But what this program is doing is really transforming communities on the ground. And that's just one example that you can share with our elected officials when it comes to how the dollars make a huge difference in the lives of women and girls around the world.
Can I just say one thing?
Absolutely.
I want to thank Grace and your colleagues at Save the Children, and also to Jonathan and his colleagues. But Save the Children works in Afghanistan, and about 6 months ago, they came under attack, and they lost a couple of employees. So I just want to acknowledge them and say thank you for the work that you do.
Yes, we have to remember this is very real. It's easy to get lost in the clouds talking about budgets and numbers, but obviously we're talking about real people and real lives. It's very, very important work. Jonathan, can you now educate us? Tell us how the federal budget works in 5 minutes or less.
5 minutes or less.
We gave you the easy part.
Well, thank you, Diane. No, I really want to thank Dining for Women. Congratulations on 15 years, and I had the good fortune of meeting a number of returned Peace Corps volunteers here, so thank you for your service, as well as anyone who served in other capacities, in the military, as an AmeriCorps volunteer, as a public servant in government. Thank you, because that's what makes our country go, and so we really appreciate all you do. One thing I want to clarify at the outset, too, is the National Peace Corps Association is a separate entity from the Peace Corps Agency. Some people I was talking to yesterday were assuming I worked for the Peace Corps. I do not. We are a non-governmental, nonprofit 501c3. Think of us like an alumni association for the Peace Corps community, returned volunteers, former Peace Corps staff, and other people that believe in the ideals and the mission of the Peace Corps. So in terms of the budget, I could go on, as I'm sure we all could. And what I thought I'd do is just try to hit on 5 points pretty quickly, and we can take it from there as we go along. Because one thing is that the budget process now in Washington at the federal level goes on year-round. It never really stops. But the first point I wanted to raise is just the federal fiscal year. When does the federal fiscal year begin and end? The federal fiscal year begins every year on October 1st. It ends on September 30th. So right now, we are about halfway through the federal fiscal year 2018. In October 1st, that will mark the beginning of federal fiscal year 2019. The second point I wanted to bring up, and it's very key, is it all starts with the president and with the administration. So the president submits his budget. And as Carrie was noting, President Trump submitted a budget that was very damaging in terms of its presentation about the international affairs budget. He introduces that budget on or about the first Tuesday in February. That's the time frame roughly when the president's budget comes out. And so they are working on that well before February 2nd. Sometimes basically in the summer, in the fall of this year, as we're moving forward, when it gets to June, July, August, September, the president's going to be working very much on getting his presentation ready for the fiscal year 2020 budget. Right now, Congress has in front of it the fiscal year 2019 budget, which the president introduced back in February. So sometimes organizations, advocacy organizations around August, September will have efforts to try to reach out to the administration because that's the time they have to start talking about the importance of what the president's going to be submitting in the budget. But then the third point is Congress getting to work. So after the president introduces the budget in February, Congress really rolls up its sleeves and gets to work. in March and April and on through. And so there's some really key moments that happen, especially in this period that we're just coming out of, March and April. The U.S. Global Leadership Coalition just led an effort on a very important letter that hopefully we'll talk a little more about related to the international affairs budget, asking senators to sign a letter supporting robust funding for the budget for the fiscal year 2019 that will start in October. So there's a lot of work that's been going on in Congress, and there's really two key committees that are highlighted in the effort. One is the Budget Committee. The House and Senate both have a Budget Committee, and when they do their work, what they're really doing is just looking at the big overall picture. How much money are we going to spend in fiscal year 2019 when it starts in October? How much money are we going to spend as a nation on our government and all the different things that we fund? And if, and that's a big if the Budget Committee gets its work done, that number can serve as a guideline for the other very key committees, the House and Senate Appropriations Committees. So the House and Senate Appropriations Committees are mirror images of themselves, which is very useful because they, at the committee level, below the committee level, there are 12 different subcommittees that basically cover all aspects of our government funding. And they're the same whether you're talking about the House or the Senate. So there's an agriculture subcommittee, there's a transportation subcommittee, there's a Veterans Affairs subcommittee, and there is a subcommittee for state and foreign operations. And that's the subcommittee that deals with practically a vast majority of all the different programs that are funded to support our international initiatives. So the full Appropriations Committee will, when they get the indication of how much money are being designated to be spent, then they make the decision of, well, how much of that pie are we going to give to transportation, to agriculture, to education? And how much are we going to give to our international programs, our State Department, our embassies, U.S. Agency for International Development, the Peace Corps, the Millennial Challenge Corporation, many different programs supporting girls' education, supporting poverty reduction, food security, all of those programs. The full subcommittee, or the full Appropriations Committee says this is how much we're going to give you guys at the subcommittee level, and then the subcommittee gets down to the business of saying how much for each of those dollars. So one of the things that's really important what USGLC does is they don't get into the individual accounts, but they keep it at that high level and bring us all together to say we need to fight for as much funding as we can get to support our international affairs programs as a whole. The idea of a rising water level lifts all boats and lifts all programs. So that work is underway right now. The fourth point is the House and the Senate work separately from each other. So the appropriations process, the Senate does their work and the House does their work. And oftentimes they aren't seeing eye to eye necessarily on how much to fund for these various programs. So for example, I think traditionally the United States Senate has put forward more money for our international affairs programs than the House of Representatives does. And eventually, the two chambers have to come back together and make the compromises and come together with one approved appropriations package where they've rectified the differences, and then they vote on it separately as chambers, and then they bring it to the president to sign it, hopefully. And then the last thing, the fifth item, was something called the continuing resolution. And I raised that because one of the things, again, we said the federal fiscal year starts on September 30th. How many of you have heard in the news, in the last year or 2 or 5 years, reports about the threat of a government shutdown. If you, yeah. So one of the things that unfortunately is happening a lot, in the 15 years that I've been working at the National Peace Corps Association, maybe once Congress has gotten its work done on time. And that is, they've maybe have passed all their appropriations bills by October 1st, but more often than not, and more increasingly, what happens is that they don't get their work done. And October 1st, that's one thing they have to do. They have to have funding in place, or the government starts closing its doors. So what they use is a prompt called the continuing resolution, where basically what they say is, we're still working on the budget, and until we do, we're going to continue to keep the doors of our federal government open at the level of funding that they've been working on. And then it usually often extends until, you know, October, November, December, and usually by December they get things worked out. Unfortunately, this past year, when was it that they got it? There's a lot more we could talk about, but they signed an agreement just about, I think, a month ago, and there's more that we could go into, but that's really the basic, and those are a couple of the critical timelines. There's a lot of work that happens in the spring with the committees. There's a lot of work that happens if you want to reach out to the president towards the summer and fall. And as everyone's mentioned, you know, going to your district offices, writing postcards at any point, especially saying, I am somebody who really supports this international affairs budget. Anytime you do that is a good time to do it.
Well, thank you. Now that we all understand the federal budget, so Jonathan, here's a tough one. So we have, of course, members, Dining for Women members from all over the country, cities large and small, rural areas. What if our member or senator doesn't work on any of these committees? What can we do?
Well, there's a lot you can do, and the first thing that I think is important to note is that every member in Congress has a role to play. So one thing that every member of Congress does is that individually they can choose to submit their personal requests to the Appropriations Committee saying, this is what I'd like you to do. I need funding for, it could be for education initiatives or whatever. So one thing you can do is ask your members of Congress, when they are submitting their personal request to the Appropriations Committee, please prioritize in that request robust funding for our international affairs programs. The letter that was just circulated is more of a public effort in that direction, and the good news is 42 senators from 30 states signed that letter, Republicans and Democrats.
Good opportunity for a thank you note.
And yes, and in front here, so one thing that you've got postcards here, and one of the things that we've got for you is a sheet that will tell you all 42 of those members of the Senate who signed the letter. We've got their phone numbers of their Washington, D.C. office, and we've got their Twitter account handle on there too. So later today, right after this session, before you sit down for lunch, this morning I called my senator, Chris Van Hollen, got on the phone, got a recorded message, said press 1 to record, and I just got on. Took me 30 seconds to say I'm a constituent. You know, I live in this part of Maryland, and thank you for signing on to the Durbin, and we've got it at the top, signing on for the Durbin, Young, Todd Young, the Republican senator from Indiana, were the two leaders on the letter. So right today, either, and if you do it by postcard, that's great too, sending a thank you. We mentioned that earlier. That's really important.
Great, great. Just out of curiosity, just a show of hands, how many of you have ever contacted in any way, email, calling, personal visit, Fantastic. Betsy, where are you? Look around. Look at this crowd. We got some, what was the term I heard yesterday? Badass women. And men. I don't want to leave out our men. So I'd like each of you to tell a little bit about what you personally have found to be the most effective for you. As I keep referring to, each of us are going to do this in our own way, because this is not a cookie cutter approach, but believe me, if we all choose at least one path, collectively we make a huge difference. So just share a little bit about what, in your opinion, has been most effective from your advocacy work. Betsy, we'll start with you.
I think combining it with my social life, being honest. You know, I go to demonstrations, that's part of my social life.
Okay, Carrie?
I would say knowing the person you're talking to, knowing who you're going in there with, and knowing the information about the member of Congress. And I learned this when I worked for a state representative. People would come into his office all the time and yell at him for not supporting something when he actually sponsored the bill. Or they would come in and the reverse would happen. They would say, thank you, thank you, thank you, and he didn't support the bill. So having that knowledge going in is so important. The other one I would say is knowing how to message it. You know, if you go in and talk to an extremely, a person of one ideology that supports certain issues, and to go and talk the language of the other side of the aisle probably isn't the most effective way to do it. Know what's going to get to that person. If it's somebody who is really keen on business and economic, frame it in an economic message. If it's somebody who's really involved in development and really supportive of women and girls issues, frame it in that message. But know who you're talking to, I think, is probably the key.
One specific example of knowing who you're talking to is in this current political environment, how Save the Children, along with various NGOs here in DC that advocate on gender equality and women and girls empowerment around the world, what we do is knowing President Trump seems to listen to private sector leaders as well as military leaders. What we've done is messaging, knowing that resonates with him. So military leaders, the reason why he listens is because he cares about national security, putting America first. When it comes to listening to private sector leaders, as a former business leader, he also really cares about economic growth and investing in the through private sector engagement. And so what has been really effective, not only in the Gender Advocacy Coalition work here in DC, but beyond with USGLC support and effort, we've really talked about, I had mentioned this earlier, but basically when we're looking at President Trump and if you're writing to him, is the national security argument and the economic argument, saying that countries are more prosperous, there's more economic growth when you actually invest in women and girls. Did you know that your GDP, countries' GDPs go up? And there's a 2015 McKinsey study about this, how when you ensure that there's full participation of women and girls in your societies, in your country, there's huge amounts of money that come up in your GDP growth. And on the national security argument, it's, we would tell him, when you invest in women and girls, did you know that specifically when it comes to peace negotiations after a conflict, when you involve women throughout the peace negotiations, there is another study that shows that it's about 30% or more the peace negotiation, 35%. Thank you, I love this. I'm learning from you, thank you. Oh, great! It will lead to lasting peace and to a peace treaty. So this is the transformative work of women and girls being at the center of our foreign policy making and what we do in international development. And I think that messaging, because I know a lot of you, I think all of you care about gender equality and empowering women and girls, right? And so when you are talking about the international affairs budget and you want to bring in the conversation about the investing in US dollars investment in women and girls, you can talk about the economic argument and the national security. It leads to peace, it leads to a lot of economic growth. So those are two effective ways we've actually found that has resonated with this administration, also with Congress, right? And just a little bit more on that is what we did at Save the Children, along with various gender advocacy coalitions, is we got together and got about 50 CEOs of private sector companies. So they're all like Fortune 500 companies. And so what we did is they signed on to a letter to Congress and to the White House saying, you need to invest in women and girls. And this is why. National security reason, economic reason. And one specific example was right now at the State Department, we have a global women's issues office that's been there for several decades under both Republican and Democratic administrations. There is no ambassador at large for global women's issues still. It's been about a year and a half, and there's the top US government official that leads on women and girls advocacy around the world is vacant. So what the CEOs of private sector companies said is, hello, US government, please appoint a qualified global women's issues ambassador to this position. What we also got was, we also did the same thing. We had an op-ed that was written by our CEO, Carolyn Miles, and retired 4-star Admiral, NATO Commander, Admiral Jim Stavridis, who is the Dean of the Fletcher School, which is a graduate school program for international affairs at Tufts University. He came from the military perspective. Our CEO came from the international development humanitarian perspective and talked about why the vacancy of the Global Women's Issues Office ambassador position leads to the deprivation and the loss of opportunity of women and girls all around the world, and how that is actually not aligned with our own national security objectives and economic growth objectives. So this is another way, 2 very specific examples of how we've been doing advocacy here in DC, but you can also use the same messaging when you're talking to your representatives back at home in your states.
Great, thank you. Johnson, so yeah.
Just the one other thing I'd just add to that is if you haven't ever gone to a district office for a meeting, never gone to Capitol Hill, try it, do it. If you know other people in your DFW groups, encourage them to do it. One of the things that I come away with sometimes when we have our Capitol Hill days and we have recently returned Peace Corps volunteers going on for the first time, there's a lot of trepidation, there's a lot of nervousness, and then after, you see them later in the day and they're like, this was fantastic, and it took them like 2 meetings and then they felt like champs. So, try it because you're gonna be impactful.
I want to add one thing since I was a little flippant before. I think that those of us like myself who are kind of political junkies are feeling enormous whiplash. It's like there's a crisis every day. And by the time we get together on Friday, we have 5 or 6 short-term, immediate, terrible things that we're responding to. And it's very easy to lose the thread of that there is actually work that's going on behind the scenes. So I think it's important to balance temporal issues about somebody's appointment or whatever, which is very important, with an ongoing commitment to something. And I think women and girls at the center of your priority will help. So you need to balance. Doesn't mean don't respond to every issue that speaks to you, but it also means you have to remember that these things are going on even when they don't make the news, because they don't. Everything is drowned out by the current climate.
Right, yeah, I think that's an excellent point, Betsy. We need to remember that the news media, while we rely on them for lots of information, also don't seem to value women and girls and aid, foreign aid. So we don't hear a lot about it in the media. So it's up to us to continue to carry that message to our representatives and let them know it is important to us, just because we're not hearing about it on CNN or whatever. I wanted to add one just little very practical point to what Jonathan said about going up on the Hill, or your State House, or wherever you're doing a lot of. Wear comfortable shoes and take a bag that you can sling over your shoulder. I learned the hard way. I tried to look like a grown-up, and I had to revert back to my REI look after a day. So, just a practical point. Now I want to ask, let's see how we're doing on time, because I want to leave plenty of time for, okay, just again, trying to bring this back to our membership, and as our folks here go back to their chapters. So if we're feeling a little overwhelmed with, all these different resources, there's lots of facts to remember, there's lots of processes to remember. What are some good tools for people back at home to get the information they're looking for, to keep up to speed on what's happening with the budget, what's happening with foreign aid, and what's happening with the issues that are really coming before the Congress at a particular time? Anybody? Carrie, you want to start with that?
USGLC. Seriously, you can go to our website. You can sign up on our website. We put out what we call the Global Gab. It's not weekly, but we do it regularly when there's information to share. One thing I do want to talk about that I know Jonathan sort of alluded to, which I think would be critical, because this will be a huge time where you have an opportunity very soon to use your voice. There's a rescission package that's going to Capitol Hill next week. The expectation. They're actually going to. Jonathan mentioned, and everyone nodded about the FY18 budget getting passed, going to the president's desk. He signed it. They're actually threatening now to pull that budget back to Congress and cut funding again. So we had originally heard that they were looking to cut $60 billion, but now it's like 10 or 11. But then there's a rumor of a second rescission package in the summer. So we are monitoring this very, very closely, and we will start a mobilization process once this happens. I will tell you, Speaker McConnell is against it, but he has also said he'll do it if the president asks him. We don't expect it to pass. Potentially it could pass the House. We don't expect it to pass the Senate. But even the fact that they're doing this is just another threat that we have to this budget. So go to USGLC's website. We'll send out this information so you can find that out. You can call me, you can call anyone in my office, and I'm sure here too. You can find out the voting records of your member of Congress, because that's also something that's very hard to get. It won't be on our website, but I can just tell you, if you call, I can find it out and very, very quickly. Yeah, your district office, right. Right.
Did everyone hear that? USA.gov and your district rep's own website.
But those are two, and then of course Save the Children and the Peace Corps and other organizations and agencies will share that any information as well.
So can I just, one quick thing. So I alluded to, you could call your senators who signed on to this important letter. So what if your senator's not on that list? So here's a number to write down. 202-224-3121. And that's the Senate Capitol Switchboard. So you can call that today, and you'll get an automated system, and it'll say, tell us what state you're from. And if you say Texas, then it'll say 1 for Senator Cornyn, say 2 for Senator Cruz. And then, yeah, 202-224-3121. So you can make those calls today as well, and talk about saying, we're concerned that the president is proposing coming back and making more cuts to the just approved budget. We're really concerned about the potential for disproportionate cuts to the international affairs programs. Please oppose that. So you got all sorts of things you can do today.
Great. Well, unfortunately, we have to, I'd love that. I have more questions, but I have to share. So I think it's time to turn it over to you all. So we're going to follow the same routine. I think we have folks with microphones. Yeah. So if you'll let them know, and then we'll take about 3 questions at a time. Oh gosh. Well, we have
3 on this
one
side.
here.
Everybody on the right side.
There you go.
It occurs to me after talking to a lot of friends that the budget that we got is very reflective of a lot of people in this country that are completely uninformed about this issue. And that, and I've talked to so many of my friends, they think that there's tons of money going. They think that the United States disproportionately gives compared to other nations. You know, there's a great thing that was just in Nicholas Kristof editorial about truly where we stand compared to other nations' GDP, and we're way behind. So my question is this, and I want to ask you guys because you guys know how to be really effective. I would love a couple of sentences or what I call my elevator speech to my friends to let them know that this information is completely incorrect because they hear it more than they hear the correct information. So what's the 2 sentences that I can give to dispel that we give tons of money, it doesn't go, and we disproportionately give compared to other countries?
Oh, sorry. Moira Donahue from Wilmington, Delaware. I'm proud to see both Senator Coons and Senator Carper sign the letter. One comment, I believe there's a website, and I think it's called Countable, and I can't remember if it's .org or .com, that we use in our Indivisible group to track congressional votes. Countable, either .org or .com. My question is, what is the line between advocacy and lobbying? And how do we make sure we don't cross it?
Okay, good. And a third? Okay, thanks.
This is, my question is, in many of these, we happen to live in a district where our local representatives generally support the things we support. We have one senator who does not. But what is our power in talking to other senators, other representatives who don't agree? They always suggest that you call us a constituent. But if you're not a constituent, what kind of power do we have to talk to others?
Okay, great. And I want to remind you, and I think this will address part of the first question, this guide, have you had a chance to look through? There's a lot of, again, great information in here that addresses parts of these concerns. So make sure you have a chance to really look at that thoroughly. But additional thoughts on the elevator speech issue.
I mostly preach to the converted where I live. But if you are fortunate enough to live in a place where it's a little more divided, think of it as an opportunity. And do not apologize, but just get those facts out there and challenge what people say. I think you have every right to provide facts, even if people choose to ignore them. But don't feel like you should hold back.
I can promise you nobody has the right answer to this question, because if they did, we'd be much more effective, and that wouldn't be misinformation. One of the things that I do say is that polling has consistently showed over the last 20 years that if you poll the public, they say, how much do we spend on foreign assistance? They say 25%, somewhere around between 10 to 25%. You ask them how much we should fund, and they say 5%. We fund 1%. So I think when you put that all together and say it's only 1%, and look what we do with 1%. We fund USAID, we fund the State Department, we fund the Peace Corps, we fund the Millennium Challenge Corporation, we fund the Overseas Private Investment Corps, we fund the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, we fund clean water initiatives, we fund poverty initiatives. And another thing that I would say is, and I'm going to ask the people here, my question is, in the last 10 years, has global poverty increased, decreased, or stayed the same? Right. People don't know that. They're effective. So share that information with 50%, right, with 1% of the federal budget. Imagine what we can continue to do. So just sharing how it is effective, I think, is also critical.
To go along with your elevator pitch, I think what has been really effective in our advocacy is storytelling. So if you can give one example of a story of how a USAID programming affected and changed the lives of, I don't know, the girl, Nicola, 17-year-old Nicola, who benefited from the Rev Program. That's a 5-year investment in girls' education and countering gender-based violence and ending child marriage. Then it's like, oh, so those are US dollars that are making a difference, and this is where I want you to continue investing in. I think that's also a good way to incorporate into your elevator pitch, because stories stay with people, and elected officials are people too who care about stories. And so just reminding yourself like that what resonates with you is also going to resonate with them.
In terms of the other questions, so one of my very best Peace Corps friends, I say, oh, I'm the advocacy director. He's the funniest guy I know, and he just looks at me and goes, oh, you're a lobbyist. And in essence, I'm not a registered lobbyist, but what we are doing in many cases is lobbying. But as a nonprofit, the National Peace Corps Association, nonprofits are allowed to lobby. The key thing here is the percentage of time you spend doing that endeavor. And the threshold, there's language that's not specific, but the general threshold is like 15 to 20% of your work. If it's lobbying, you're okay with your nonprofit status. In terms of the question of if your lawmakers are always with you, and obviously saying thank you is always important. One thing we sometimes say to folks is, you know, instead of you calling up the senator in the state next to you who maybe isn't as important, take that, 30 minutes to think of, is there anybody I know in that state who I can spend my time reaching out to and asking them to take action to build the further base.
If I can just add to that, saying thank you, of course, is critical. Also, you can ask your supportive member of Congress to talk to other members. Yeah. Go and talk to your colleague in the state and that's a part of the delegation or not part of the delegation and get them, persuade them. And then as far as Senator Coons is concerned, he is wonderful. We actually do his annual event with him now. We've taken it over, his Africa event. So we did it last year. We're doing it again. So stay in touch with us. It'll be, I think, in October.
You can also advocate with corporations and companies, as Grace was saying. The coalition. If you are proud of something, a product that you are a regular purchaser of, let them know. They don't hear from that many customers. Or if you're opposed to something and you're going to stop purchasing that product, that is also useful.
I'm just going to join in the presentation here and represent Dining for Women about the difference between lobbying and advocacy and where we fall. And what our future is. We're still determining what our future is, but Dining for Women will never in what I see as our future, we will not have a person that is specifically hired to be a full-time person dedicated to advocacy. But even if we did, it would still be a small enough percentage of our budget that we would fall within the IRS guidelines. So that is something to keep in mind. The IRS guidelines, and this is where the law comes in, are 10 to 15%, as Jonathan said. This year, we received a $25,000 grant from Oxfam to help produce this advocacy guide. So Dining for Women, by encouraging our members to advocate through grassroots advocacy, we are not even getting our chalk on our shoes. We are not even near that line. So I want you all to feel confident in telling your members about that. One other thing, please dig into that advocacy guide. We have stories in there from grantees. We have the USGLC's slides on the 2017 budget on where the 1% went. We have the facts for your friends. Dig into that. There's information that you can use with your friends, with your family who may see things differently than you. I send it to my father. I mean, really, that's like a big deal. So it's fabulous, and we had many experts weigh in on it. So please read that advocacy guide through and through. Thank you. Sorry.
No, that's very important information, and I want to echo what Beth Ellen says, that certainly as a citizen, you don't have to worry about whether you're going to be labeled a lobbyist. You are being an active, engaged citizen. That is our right. That's what, back to my first point, that's what makes democracy work. So have no worries about that. You are absolutely not only legally entitled to, I would feel you have a moral duty to speak up about any issue that concerns you. Carrie, you had something?
I wanted to add one more thing about, we talked about current members of Congress, but we also have an opportunity and a challenge right now, is that we're in an election year. And there is the potential to swing the House, there's the potential to swing the Senate, whether that's a good or bad thing is your personal choice. But you have an opportunity to go to town halls and go talk to candidates and raise your hand and ask the question of the candidate, where do you stand on this issue? And make your voice heard as a candidate and educate them as a candidate, because oftentimes these candidates don't have a reason to know anything about the international affairs budget, much less women and girls issues. So take advantage of that opportunity. Populism, the America First agenda is thriving in many districts around the country, and you all are the counter to that.
Somebody asked about if your representative or senators are on your side. It was a Pennsylvanian. I am told, or we have been told, that if you write to a senator as a chair of a committee, specifically, or a member of a committee, even if you're not their constituent, they are representing all Americans around a specific issue. So if you specifically say, in your role as chairman of the Appropriations Committee, blah, blah, blah. So I don't know if it works, but you know that doing nothing doesn't work.
One thing, sharing your personal stories is also, if you've got a story to tell about your experiences, that it's important to know the facts, it's important to know the figures. Don't try to memorize them all, know a couple of key points, and then bring your person to that. And one of the reasons I wanted to just get this in is I know Carrie Hessler-Radlett will be speaking tonight, and I would not be surprised if she tells a story that is one of the most amazing stories I've heard. It's a story that involves military leader General Eikenberry. So if Carrie doesn't tell the General Eikenberry story in her remarks, if there's Q&A time, ask her about the General Eikenberry story. And the reason being is that when we're up here talking about why and what impact do all of these programs have, in our country and in the world, the story she will tell you about her conversation with General Eikenberry will make you cry, but it will also inspire you.
I'm so sorry. I think we're almost out of time. I want to ask each panelist to give us just a quick one last thought or thing that you want to impart to our group before we have to leave.
I did mine right there.
Okay. Okay, Grace, do you have any final thoughts?
I think just remembering that you can make a huge difference as an individual, having your voice heard, and you can be that person that advocates for girls like Nicola, other girls that don't have a voice around the world, and just be yourself in how you tell your story. Be authentic. Don't feel like you have to be a professional advocate or a lobbyist in order to be heard or listened to. They are accountable to you as a citizen, as a constituent, and make sure that you actually vote. Make sure every year, whether it's a primary or a general, you are not as credible if you're not an active citizen. So it's great if you do postcard writing campaigns and everything, but make sure you back it up with your voting record. as you would want your elected official to be backed up by what they say with their voting record on issues. So there's that.
They all stole what I was going to say, but I would just go back to what we've sort of reiterated throughout this whole time is that there are opportunities. If you have a friendly member of Congress, you still have an opportunity. If you have a member of Congress that's not friendly, you have an opportunity. You have candidates running in your districts. You can run for office. You can step up and say, I'm going to speak for women and girls with my vote in Congress. So there's always an opportunity. Find them and take advantage of it. And again, if anyone is interested to talking to me afterwards, you all are a part of USGLC and our efforts here. I'm happy to talk to you further about what we're doing and how you can engage with us as well.
I think I'm just echoing what I said before, but I think companionship, finding a buddy, finding a group, bringing postcards to your Dining for Women meeting with a little bit of advanced planning. It doesn't need to be a huge amount of preparation. You don't need to be the world's expert. You just need to have a plan and then share it with people and use that leadership that you can do. And people are so grateful to have someone telling them how they can be helpful. So be that person.
My last thought is, I think, it's easy to get discouraged. Our work is huge. The problem seems large. But I think we have so many places of hope here. One is, remember when our speaker, the professor from Tufts, Dr. Eichenberg, told us yesterday that 81% of Americans believe that gender equality should be a priority in foreign aid. We are not alone. There may be many, many people who've never heard of Dining for Women, but when you meet them, when you talk to these people, they are instinctively, they understand that this is important. The other thing that I find incredibly hopeful, and believe me, I'm a blue dot in a red state where I live, but as I said, one of our leaders on this is Lindsey Graham. We disagree on many issues. We've talked about lots of things, but boy, are we in sync on this. So there is great hope for us. This is the one area that Congress really, you see so many of these bills we've talked about today, committee members from across the aisle really working together. So there is great opportunity for success. So don't be discouraged. Just please carry the message back to your chapters. And I cannot thank you enough for your interest in this very important work. And please help me thank our fabulous panel. And don't forget your goodies down here.